Most people think this story began with a strange statement. They remember a headline, a joke, or a dismissed idea that briefly passed through the news cycle. That framing is convenient, and it is wrong. This isn't about a former president's personality. It isn't about nationalism. And it isn't about territorial ambition in the traditional sense. This is about a structural weakness the United States cannot afford to carry into the next phase of great power competition. Once you identify that weakness clearly, the outcome stops being debatable. The number most people hear is $4 trillion. The figure refers to estimated mineral reserves in Greenland. It sounds large, but it distracts from the real issue. The actual number only emerges when you account for what those minerals unlock: military independence, supply chain resilience, Arctic trade leverage, and long-term strategic positioning. When those variables are combined over a 50-year horizon, the value approaches $87 trillion. More importantly, it solves a failure point the United States cannot resolve anywhere else. A single point of failure is rare earth dependence. Modern power is not defined by how many weapons a country owns. It is defined by whether it can replace them at scale during stress. Rare earth elements are not optional inputs. They are the enabling layer beneath precision warfare and advanced industry. Guidance systems, stealth coatings, high-efficiency motors, radar arrays, satellite communications, none of these function without rare earths. At the moment, the United States does not control the processing of these materials. That control sits overwhelmingly with China. This is not because China possesses all known deposits. It is because China made a long-term industrial decision decades ago that Western economies avoided. They accepted environmental cost, pricing volatility, and low margins to dominate processing capacity while others optimize for efficiency and distance. That decision is now embedded into the global system. A military power that depends on a strategic competitor for critical inputs is not secure. That configuration is unstable by definition. Strategic planners cannot accept it. This isn't speculation. It is a constraint. Greenland alters that constraint. Its rare earth deposits are large enough to support American defense and advanced manufacturing demand for decades. They also break pricing leverage by introducing an alternative supply that is not subject to external veto. Even if these estimates are cut in half, the conclusion does not change. Dependence disappears, control returns. That alone would be sufficient to justify decisive action. But rare earths are only the foundation layer. Geography locks the next outcome into place. The Arctic is no longer theoretical. It is becoming operational within the same time frame as the next phase of global competition. As ice coverage retreats, new shipping routes shorten the distance between Asia and Europe dramatically. Shorter routes reduce fuel consumption, crew costs, insurance exposure, and fleet turnover time. Those savings compound across global trade volumes. When routes shorten, control shifts. The Arctic does not open evenly. It opens through choke points. And Greenland sits beside one of the most important of them. Any serious Arctic shipping corridor must pass near Greenlandic waters and airspace. Control of monitoring, refueling, port access, and maritime enforcement becomes decisive. This is not symbolic leverage. It is operational leverage measured in fees, delays, inspections, and denial. This is where scale matters. Denmark governs Greenland politically, but it cannot develop or enforce Arctic control at the level required to counter peer competitors. It does not have the naval reach, the capital base, or the enforcement depth to sustain that role under pressure. The United States does. Delay changes everything. Once infrastructure is built, ports, logistics hubs, communications networks, it becomes politically and economically locked in. The first actor to finance and secure these assets gains lasting leverage. Waiting does not preserve neutrality. It transfers advantage by default. This is why timing matters now. Military geometry removes the remaining ambiguity. Greenland sits between North America and Eurasia. Ballistic missile trajectories cross it. Early warning detection depends on it. Northern air and naval operations are shaped by it. This is physics, not policy. The United States already relies on installations there for missile detection and Arctic surveillance. But access today is governed by agreements, not sovereignty. Agreements can be revised. Political coalitions shift. Nuclear early warning systems are not designed around optimism. They are designed around certainty. From a purely operational standpoint, Greenland functions as an unsinkable forward platform. It shortens response times, expands surveillance reach, and anchors Arctic dominance in a way mainland bases cannot replicate. Right now, that advantage is conditional. Conditional advantages are unacceptable in a system defined by escalation risk. This isn't about expansion. It's about removing uncertainty from systems that cannot tolerate it. And when you step back and view all of this together, materials, trade routes, military geometry, and timing, the logic stops being controversial. It becomes structural. In part 2, the picture becomes clearer when economic leverage, Arctic trade mathematics, and the limitations of Danish governance collide, and when the process that leads to transfer begins to take shape. If rare earths explain why Greenland matters, economics explains why the timeline collapses. This is where the discussion usually becomes distorted because people frame the question incorrectly. They ask how much it would cost the United States to acquire influence over Greenland. That is the wrong question. The correct question is how much it costs not to. The Arctic is not opening slowly, it is opening unevenly and irreversibly. That distinction matters. Trade routes do not reconfigure based on treaties or good intentions. They reconfigure based on distance, fuel burn, insurance risk, and enforcement certainty. When a route becomes cheaper and reliable enough, capital reroutes automatically. The Northern Passage reduces transit time between East Asia and Northern Europe by weeks. That time, compression compounds into operating cost reductions across entire fleets. Fuel savings are measurable. Crew cycles shorten. Vessel utilization improves. Insurance premiums fall once predictability increases. Multiply those savings across thousands of voyages per year, across decades. This is not incremental value. This is structural reallocation. Once shippers commit to Arctic routes, the infrastructure that supports them follows. Ports, refueling stations, search and rescue coverage, communications networks. The actor that finances and secures those assets captures long-term leverage, and this is where control matters. Greenland sits beside the most valuable monitoring corridor in the Arctic system. Any vessel moving through that northern route enters a zone where access, inspection, and support can be regulated. Control does not require closure. It requires optional friction. Optional friction is power. Denmark cannot exercise this power at scale, and this is not a critique of competence. It is a constraint of size. Denmark does not have the capital reserves to build multi-decade Arctic infrastructure at the speed required. It does not have the naval mass to enforce maritime control under challenge. And it does not have the political flexibility to override environmental and local resistance when strategic urgency accelerates. The result is paralysis. Paralysis is not neutral. It creates a vacuum. The vacuum invites external capital. That capital is already circling. Chinese firms have shown consistent interest in Greenlandic infrastructure projects, mining concessions, and logistics nodes, not because of ideology, but because capital moves toward leverage. If infrastructure is built under foreign financing, the leverage follows the financing. Once that happens, dislodging influence becomes exponentially more expensive. Contracts harden. Employment dependencies form. Political incentives realign. Strategic planners cannot accept a future where Arctic trade infrastructure critical to global commerce is financed and influenced by China. This is where delay becomes fatal. Every year without decisive action narrows the available paths forward. Every postponed investment raises the eventual cost. Every unbuilt port increases the likelihood that someone else builds it first. Even if the numbers are discounted aggressively, the direction remains fixed. The economics do not balance in favor of waiting. Now add military economics to the equation. The United States already spends tens of billions annually maintaining Arctic readiness through dispersed bases, rotational deployments, and overseas agreements. These arrangements are expensive precisely because they are indirect. Owning the platform collapses that cost structure. Greenland functions as a permanent forward position. Early warning systems, air operations, naval coordination, and surveillance depth consolidate into a single geography. That consolidation reduces redundancy elsewhere. Redundancy is expensive. Over a multi-decade horizon, the savings compound into trillions. Even if those savings are cut in half, the conclusion does not change. Then there's the leverage value, the component most balance sheets ignore. Control of rare earth supply weakens external pricing power. Control of Arctic access creates negotiation leverage. Control of northern surveillance shortens escalation timelines for adversaries. Each of these effects reduces future defense spending by lowering uncertainty. Uncertainty is expensive. Certainty is efficient. This is why the question of cost becomes irrelevant. When a system is exposed to existential dependencies, eliminating those dependencies becomes mandatory regardless of sticker price. The alternative is accepting compounding vulnerability. Denmark's position in this equation is structurally weak. It subsidizes Greenland to maintain stability. It prioritizes gradual development and environmental protection. It frames the timeline in decades. That timeline no longer exists. The Arctic is not waiting. Capital is not waiting. Geopolitical competition is not waiting. Maintaining the status quo effectively transfers decision-making to outside actors by default. It allows leverage to form without control. It allows infrastructure to harden without alignment. That outcome is unacceptable to American planners. So the process shifts. The first stage is economic pressure, subtle, deniable, and persistent. Trade negotiations tighten. Investment flows adjust. Risk premiums rise. The cost of maintaining control quietly increases. The second stage is direct engagement. Investment offers appear that cannot be matched locally. Development packages promise employment, infrastructure, and long-term integration. These offers are framed as partnership, not takeover. Public opinion becomes fluid. The third stage is formalization. Once the economic gravity shifts, political alignment follows. Referendums, legal frameworks, and negotiated settlements provide legitimacy after the structure has already moved. By the time formal decisions occur, resistance has eroded. This is not coercion in the traditional sense. It is constraint alignment. When every alternative becomes more expensive than compliance, choice disappears without force. In Part 3, the final layer comes into focus. Military certainty, escalation control, and why sovereignty, not access, becomes the only acceptable end state. The final layer is the one that removes all remaining ambiguity. Economics explains urgency. Geography explains leverage, but military certainty explains why the end state cannot remain conditional. Access is not control. That distinction matters more here than anywhere else. The United States already operates critical systems in Greenland, early warning radar, Arctic surveillance, forward positioning that shortens response time in the northern hemisphere. But every one of those systems exists by permission. Permission is not a foundation for nuclear-era planning. Strategic planners do not design missile defense around political goodwill. They design it around permanence. They assume worst-case alignment shifts, not best-case cooperation. This is not distrust. It is doctrine. Greenland sits directly beneath the shortest trajectories between Eurasia and North America. Ballistic paths are determined by physics, not diplomacy. Any northern launch crosses that airspace. Any credible early warning architecture depends on uninterrupted coverage there. The coverage cannot be negotiable. Agreements can be revised. Governments change. Coalitions fracture under pressure. The difference between guaranteed control and conditional access is the difference between certainty and risk. In nuclear deterrence, risk is unacceptable. From an operational standpoint, Greenland is an unsinkable platform. Unlike carriers or overseas bases, it cannot be denied through conventional means. It anchors air operations, undersea monitoring, and space domain awareness in a single geography that no alternative location can replicate. That advantage only matters if it is permanent. Right now, it is not. Denmark is a capable ally, but it is not a peer power. In a high-stress scenario involving escalation with Russia or China, Copenhagen would face pressure far beyond its strategic depth. Decisions would be made under economic, political, and diplomatic strain. American planners cannot allow nuclear early warning reliability to hinge on that pressure. This is where sovereignty becomes non-negotiable, not symbolic sovereignty, operational sovereignty, the ability to expand installations without consultation, the ability to deploy assets without political delay, the ability to integrate systems without renegotiation. Anything less preserves vulnerability. This is also where containment logic converges. China's Arctic strategy is not theoretical. It is incremental and disciplined. Infrastructure investment, research stations, shipping partnerships, and financing initiatives are designed to establish presence before formal governance hardens. Once influence is embedded, removal becomes prohibitively expensive. Greenland is the gap in that expansion. If Arctic infrastructure is financed externally, strategic alignment follows the capital. If ports, logistics nodes, and communications networks form under foreign influence, control is ceded without a formal transfer. That outcome would permanently constrain American freedom of operation in the Arctic. Strategic planners cannot accept an Arctic domain where access is conditional on external alignment. Blocking that future requires control, not oversight. This is why the process converges toward the same conclusion regardless of political framing. First, economic alignment shifts. Investment flows concentrate. Infrastructure funding appears that no local authority can match. Second, political narratives adapt. Autonomy, partnership, development guarantees, local consent framed as opportunity rather than loss. Third, legal formalization follows. Agreements, referendums, negotiated settlements, each step appears discrete. Each step feels voluntary, but the direction was fixed once the constraints aligned. Denmark's position becomes impossible to maintain. Maintaining control requires capital it does not have, enforcement capacity it cannot scale, and political choices it is unwilling to make. Blocking development preserves environmental integrity, but transfers leverage externally. Accelerating development invites geopolitical confrontation Denmark cannot manage. There is no stable middle ground. For the United States, the calculus is simpler. Every year of delay increases exposure. Every unbuilt installation increases dependency. Every unresolved agreement preserves uncertainty. Uncertainty compounds. That is why timelines compress. This is not a slow acquisition story. It is a convergent story. Once rare Earth dependence, Arctic trade rerouting, military geometry, and containment logic align, delay becomes more dangerous than action, even if every estimate is discounted. Even if development costs rise, even if political resistance remains, the structure does not change. This is why the outcome will not feel dramatic. There will be no single announcement that declares conquest. There will be no obvious breaking point. Instead, There will be a sequence of administrative decisions that make alternatives impractical. Expanded bases, integrated infrastructure, aligned investment, formalized governance. At some point, the distinction between access and control disappears. The label applied afterward will be negotiated carefully. Territory, associated status, special framework. The terminology will be chosen to preserve diplomatic dignity, but labels do not determine power. Control does. In hindsight, this will not look like expansion. It will look like risk management, a system correcting a vulnerability it could no longer tolerate. The real mistake is thinking this is optional. When a superpower identifies a structural dependency that threatens military production, trade leverage, and early warning reliability at the same time, elimination becomes mandatory, not because of ambition, because of survival logic. Greenland resolves too many constraints at once to remain outside that logic. That is why debate around legality, consent, or precedent misses the point. Those questions shape the method, not the destination. The destination is already defined by mathematics, geography, and time. Years from now, when the arrangement feels permanent and unremarkable, the question will not be how it happened. The question will be why anyone thought it wouldn't. And the answer will be simple. The system could not balance any other way.